Thank you very much. Well, towards the social history of school meals. This is the first presentation for this research project, which has been generously funded by the ESRC, and our thanks to the ESRC for its support for this project. My co-investigators in this project are Dr. Heather Ellis of the University of Sheffield and Dr. Gobinder Lally of Wolverhampton University. This is very much a team effort, and we'll be appointing 3 research associates over the next few weeks who will be able to support this project as well as we go along. What I'm wanting to do today is to talk about some of the related literature on this topic, which has helped to guide us towards our thinking at this current stage, to look at the general characteristics of the school meals service since its beginning as a national set of provisions in 1906, the 1906 provision of Meals Acts, and to understand it in 3 different ways. First of all, as policy history, the development of policies both at national level and at local level. Secondly, as a social history, as seeing it as being sometimes argued as importantly argued, I think, as a social institution, as part of the community, as being very important for parents as well as for schools, and also as an ethnographic case study, looking at it from the point of view of the schools themselves, the teachers, the ladies, everybody who's involved in the project as a big count. So I'm wanting to go through some of those in a little detail today. A social history of school meals conjures up all sorts of images for us, I think. It's been, I think, consistently and prominently a political issue in education. More, I think, than just about any other kind of welfare reform that has been developed in our schools. Why is that? I think basically one could take it back to the emotive power of hungry children, of hunger, going back to the 19th century of Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist, the sheer want and anxiety around where the next meal is coming from. Being very much an emotive issue for our society, which has endured well into the 21st century. Which one could see in the very news items that come across our tables every day. You know, I have here a news item from no less than the Times, 19th of December 2022. Teachers washing people's clothes and feeding them, which it points out that 2/5 of teachers had brought vital school and homework supplies such as pens, papers or bags. 1 in 8 respondents said they'd cleaned children's clothes when they're dirty. 1 in 10 had brought part of their school uniforms, and many of them had brought food at different times in order to support their pupils. And that brings about very emotive, very strong reactions, of course, as one might expect. More broadly, more theoretically, I guess an issue such as the provision of school meals tests our ideas about the limits and the scope of state authority in education, about how far schooling is a compulsory set of provisions, and how far it's obligatory. It's a matter of no choice at all in the kind of schooling that one finds, and this is an issue that I think keeps cropping up as well. But also more personally, it's a kind of issue which is etched in our personal memories. It's one of the things that for many people is what we remember most about schooling. It goes along with in England the 11+ examination with corporal punishment. You could say that school meals are up there with those choice parts of our school experience, which we never lose the kinds of good and bad experiences that we associate with school meals and the experience of them. I think those are some of the kinds of things which really bring home to us how school meals are seen as very important. And since the pandemic, they've been particularly topical. They've rarely been out of the newspapers. The provision of school meals has very often been seen as inadequate for various kinds of reasons. They've varied in different areas. They've been dependent on local initiatives. Often the government has seemed to be forced into making concessions to go forward, and so it's been very much a matter of public concern, public controversy over the last few years in particular, and that seems set to continue over the next period. So some of the kinds of work which we've looked at, which I think have really had a bearing on this work so far. I think one would be James Vernon's work on the history of hunger, and this has really touched a nerve in terms of what I've been talking about there of hungry children, the social history of hunger and what it's meant in a changing society over the centuries. And this, particularly in chapter 6 on collective feeding and the welfare of society, brings in ideas about why it was that school feeding, as it was called, was brought into schools in the first place. What were its ideas? What were its aims and its plans to go forward? And according to Vernon, in part, the idea was to create a sanitary and congenial space for school meals, but also to provide the physical accoutrements of civility that were often seen to be absent from the poorest homes, where food went directly from hand in mouth. Tables, chairs, plates, cups, cutlery, even tablecloths and flowers. In other words, an engagement project to try to develop the habits, the manners of middle-class society, which eating in company was seen to be a part of. This went well beyond the simple provision of food, which would allay an everyday hunger, towards a social project, which could be seen to be a class project as well, from middle class to working class children in elementary schools, and this underlies some of the earliest concerns about it, which seem to override the views of many politicians and policymakers that it wasn't a matter for national policy to interfere in the rights and duties of parents to provide food for their pupils. If you've got compulsory schooling, the argument went, you need to provide suitable provision for school meals, and particularly for children who had most need of them, and couldn't get them in any other way, to provide free school meals as well. But the argument then took the turn of, well, what was it that would mean that they had particular recourse to it? and need not necessarily be expected to pay for it. So this is a broad contextual kind of study, of which there are many, which I think are very important in trying to relate a particular topic such as this to broader social, cultural, political, and economic issues as they imprint themselves upon school meals. In other words, this is exactly this kind of issue which is suitable for us considering it as a social history, not simply an educational history, not simply about food even, but about an understanding of our society and the place of school meals within that. I think that's how we wanted to situate this project. Another useful work, which I think we found interesting, is a comparative international study. There aren't actually all that many of these, and I think that one of the ways in which we can understand school meals in more detail as we go ahead is to try to get a more international sense of comparisons and contrasts, indeed, between national experiences of school meals, even around Europe, as we're already starting to find. There are major differences between different countries in how school meals are seen, in the types of meals which are provided, in views about nutrition, and the general kinds of aims and achievements of this, even since the Second World War. And I think we can expect to find more and more differences coming out as we get a broader, more worldwide kind of view of it. So far, and I think we wanted to take an initial emphasis on the national situation, but I think even in understanding the national situation, looking at the broader international context will certainly be relevant to that, and I hope we'll be able to say something about this. Jennifer Geist-Rutledge's work, Feeding the Future, School Lunch Programs as Global Social Policy, is certainly a starting point towards that kind of more general aim. Global social policy is again another kind of way in which we could conceive this kind of project. It's social history, but it's also social policy, and I think it's those two kinds of notions of it go very much together with each other. Another way in which we're wanting to see this is in terms of what we could call sensory history. It's very important, I think, for us to understand, as maybe one or two of my remarks already can help us towards, is that school meals are not simply a matter of a technical issue, something which is based on even rationality or on academic or conceptual issues. It's very much a felt issue, something that is part and parcel of our senses. And this is something which many historians, including Mark M. Smith, a pioneer of the area in the United States, have really developed over the last 10 years or more, 10, 20 years. And Mark M. Smith, his original work in sensory history in 2008 has been followed by many other works by him and his colleagues, and is also starting to play more of a role in this country in educational and social history. The 5 key senses: sight and sound and touch and smell and taste, and these play an important part in how we understand the aspects of particular areas in education and society. And we can immediately see that each of these have got an important bearing on our ideas about school meals. The sight of school meals is being very important to how we understand and think about them. They have a particular kind of sound in many cases as well. The touch of food, an important kind of concept. The smell, of course, even particular smells 30, 40 years after you leave school can take you back immediately to the experience of schooling and what it was like, in a rather Proustian kind of way. And the taste of food, most obviously perhaps, the good and the bad sensations of particular kinds of food in the mouth and on the tongue. And really trying to get to grips, you could say, with the sensory aspects of food. It is a challenging kind of aspect. It's something which I think if we're to understand it fully, we need to try to get to some kind of sense of our understanding of this, and again of the place of this in our schooling and in our society as a whole. So school meals as in terms of our sensory experiences as a community. Again, this is one kind of angle which we're quite conscious of. I think also the ideas about supply and demand, I think, have been in our thinking. There's an excellent American historian who wrote a short essay, Supply and Demand, and he called these the two histories of English education. One kind of history looking at the kind of supply side of particular provision in English education. But the other side, which is often ignored or underrated, is the demand side, the demand of the community, of parents, and of the children themselves, of particular kinds of things that they would like to look for from education. Rothblatt argued that the history of working class education in England is usually written from the supply side. And he pointed out the need to understand what he saw as market forces in England in particular, although that could be extended more broadly, of course. By market forces, he understood that to mean the great variety of social rules and rule regime that govern market contracts, entry and exit, the process of negotiation and mediation, the false starts and successes, and even the efforts taken to avoid market discipline that occur when parties engage in transactions. That being quite a broad notion about market forces, the kind of negotiation that takes place, and the provision of school bills is exactly the kind of issue there about transactions and negotiation and contracts that are the nitty-gritty, the kind of mediation that might well be at the heart of our understanding of how this takes place. Peter Mandlin's recent work on meritocracy in English education, also a very good example of supply and demand kind of history, which we're very conscious of Adam Peter's broader contribution. And another work from the United States, David Tyek and Larry Cuban, their work, Tinkering Toward Utopia, a work that I've always admired greatly for its understanding of educational change, which they argue that there's a notion of the usable past, which we need to use to understand that the past, not only for its interesting stories, although it's certainly got there, but for what it can contribute to our understanding of the present and the future. And this again is very much at the heart of our work in this project. And we're hoping to make a contribution towards not only our understanding of this very interesting story, but our view of the kind of possibilities which it might have in the future. Of course, we can't go back to 1906, even if we wanted to, nor even the 1944 Education Act. But we want to see what it is from the experience of our past, from our historical experience, the kinds of ways in which that experience can help us to understand what our possibilities are for developing a school bill service that's appropriate for the 21st century. and maybe in a more coherent way that has been done before. That, I think, is a big challenge for us as a project, but we want to take it on and see how far we can get to. Tyke and Coover themselves say, whether they are aware of it or not, all people use history defined as an interpretation of past events when they make choices about the present and the future. The real issue, they say, is not whether people use a sense of the past in shaping their lives, but how accurate and appropriate are their historical maps. Very, very profound statement, I think. And they look at particular cases of the way through that. Very short, very readable book in looking at how that can be done in practice. And I always come back to a wonderful quote by the sociologist Raymond Williams. We do not solve the critical questions by understanding the history, but still an adequate sense of the history, as opposed to the ordinary functional myths, is the basis of any useful approach. Certainly, it would be a basic aim of our project, that we can go well beyond the ordinary functional myths to try to get more of an adequate sense of that history. And so thinking about the different aspects of the project as it will develop. One aspect of it is as policy history. It began as a national provision from the 1906 Education and Provision of Mills Act, which itself was the product of some time of negotiation and discussion about how far it was appropriate for there to be national provision, as opposed to local provision, which varied in different kinds of areas. Even after the 1906 Act, that for many years, really until the Second World War, it was a matter of local choice, the choice of local authorities about how much they actually were going to provide for school meals and this kind of area. And there are wide variations around the country in how it should be done. And also the criteria for whether it should be free school meals was done in terms of the view of the school medical officer about malnutrition. And again, that was down to various kinds of judgments, not only in terms of science, but also about what malnutrition really involved. So a lot of very interesting debates about what the aims and achievements were at school meals, even in that period. Views changed, particularly during the experience of the Second World War, a period of food rationing, where the eating of meals, including school meals, was seen as part of the national war efforts, but also one of equality of sacrifice, in which such things as evacuation brought it home to a broader public. The inequalities in society. Such issues led to basic change in the provision under the 1944 Education Act, paragraph 49. A lot of influence there during the war by Clement Attlee, the leader of the Labour Party and Deputy Prime Minister during the war, who was particularly concerned about school meals. And the 1944 Education Act was intended to make the school meals part of a living welfare state, which was supposed to emerge from the war, in which school meals would become generally part of the school curriculum as such. In fact, one of the few aspects of the school curriculum which was supposed to be actually compulsory, along with religious education. School meals were a compulsory part of the curriculum for all pupils, and this was a definite change from the sporadic interpretation of the pre-war period. And I think we could say that that kind of phase, the welfare state phase of school bills, lasted till around about the 1980 Education Act, which moved the provision of school bills away from the centre towards the local authorities again, and leading to wider choice and interpretation and our current situation. But also other kinds of changes in policy have had a major impact on the provision of school bills. The changes in local governments have been very important indeed. The development of devolved governments for England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have been very important. And you can see when you look at each of those four nations, the very wide differences in how school mills are developed. Also, another aspect for schools themselves is the growth in school governance, in which schools were supposed to have more of a say in what provisions they ought to get, in making contracts for various sorts of things. And school bills very much part and parcel of that new regime of negotiation for particular contracts for provisions, which again, I think we'll be looking at quite closely to see what kind of impact those sorts of things have made. Those are kind of general aspects about policy history, which I think we're particularly aware of at the moment, and we'll start to be able to theorize that background, I think, fairly shortly in our next presentations. But also, just as much as that policy history is a social history more closely defined around parents and the community, for example. A letter we've already come across in the National Archives is a parent's letter in London to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Roy Jenkins, in 1968. A few interesting things there already is that there's not the Ministry of Education, it's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. You know, it's not simply an education issue. And Roy Jenkins was a Labour minister, and during a Labour government, which is supposed to be generally very interested in social policy, said to Roy Jenkins, "My daughters consider it to be extremely embarrassing to have free dinners, and I have asked the local authority if it would be possible for the two younger children to have them instead. I have 5 children at school. But they inform me that it's the law that the older children only can receive these." So it's the interaction between the law and the society, which is important there, but also the actual idea that it's actually extremely embarrassing to have free dinners. And you go there towards the actual social stigma, which it often was, the shame indeed of having to have free dinners when their colleagues didn't have them. And the well-known experience of many children of a certain generation to have to line up with their own different kinds of badges, so that it's well known to everybody who's having free dinners and who wasn't. And really that's part of the aspects, you could say more broadly, of a sensory history of the society, and how you could say it was a particular kind of inequality that it gave rise to. And again, the kind of ways in which we've become perhaps more conscious of that, and the different ways in which that's in the 2020s. And more on that, I think, will come. I think also, when one's looking at the social history, of course, the social history of children, and a very good example of this is in the excellent autobiography of Alan Johnson, the former Labour Home Secretary, his memoirs of a childhood spent in London in the 1950s and 1960s, which is definitely around poverty, hunger and poverty, really the elemental issues right at the base of this. And there's no question that of the poverty that was experienced by some of these children, even as recently as this within living memory. From the time we started, we qualified for free school meals and were under instructions from Lily, his mother, to eat as much as we could in case there wasn't anything for us when we got home. Really very, very clear statement of the importance of free school meals, which I think we can see from all kinds of evidence, certainly hasn't gone away. Another kind of social history would be about prosperity, and the views that in the post-war years, the needs for rationing, the poverty of the pre-war years had gone away, and therefore we didn't need school meals in the same way as we had before. The view of the Treasury, already hardening in the 1950s and 1960s, that school meals were too expensive and needed some management for that supply to be slowly managed down. 1960, in the modern social context and within the government's general philosophy, there seems no reason why parents whose means allow should not pay the full cost. And I think that hardened by the late 1970s to the view that local educational authorities should be responsible for school meals, with the government setting nutritional standards perhaps and charges, but taking the provision out of the central educational expenditure, which was rapidly rising. And the view, which was very much against the view that had been taken during the Second World War, that school meals were not an educational issue, didn't raise standards, but were a separate issue. Again, that set itself against the view, which had been widely held earlier in the century, that school meals actually improved the education, the educational capacity of pupils. And again, some basic kinds of attitudes towards schooling and education, which are bound up in those different kinds of views. The Treasury in 1977, views coming across there, the original purpose of the service itself may even become anachronistic. Do parents really need to be relieved of responsibility for providing their children with the main meal of the day? It was asked. The same kind of question that was being asked in 1906. Are local authorities really not responsible enough to settle the nutritional standards of the meal in the form of and charge for it, for that matter, without detailed direction from the centre? I could go on, this person said. In 1977, there were over 6 million school meals being provided every day. 10% of these for teachers and supervisors and kitchen staff, only 25% free for children from local income families, 65% of the standard charge for children, which is actually 25 pence in September 1977, and a net expenditure of 221 million. So the same official asked, is it still necessary even for local authorities to provide a midday meal at all? The alternative would be for local authorities to provide tables and chairs and supervision, but to require pupils either to go home or to bring their own packed lunches to school. And debates and controversies around that basic kind of line have continued in various quarters since that time. And in the last few years, there's been growing recognition of a problem, with some very worthy and important, significant efforts being made, very often very prominent, with leading footballers involved, for example, at school-based and local level. But a national strategy being called for by many different interest groups, and the debate among them is still going on, and worthwhile looking at more closely. Schools themselves, not only the parents and the communities, also being influenced for their characteristics by the changes taking place in school meals. Swansea Education Department, 1947, produced a pamphlet talking about the impact of the war and saying that the provision of meals had changed from being a service carrying the stigma of charity, again this idea of stigma, and condemned often to ramshackle and insalubrious premises, inevitably associated with a school kitchen. So architectural issues about the character of the school coming there, not simply the pedagogical and the classroom issues, to a social and educational function which embraces all classes of children and all types of schools, many different types of schools, many classes of children, and is accepted as part of the ordinary fabric of community living as practiced during childhood. To what extent have school meals become part of the ordinary fabric of community living as practiced during childhood? And is that an aim to which we should properly aim in the 21st century? That again is a question which we might want to raise during the project. And so some of the issues around the balance of demand and supply really being part of that. He said losing his place quite quickly, and really trying to balance out some of these major issues which we have already sort of come across. I think we've got a sense of the kinds of areas we wanted to focus on over the next year. We're wanting to really take this on and have a very sort of close look at our field work, and then what we wanted to write in conjunction with our colleagues in different areas. And I'll move from the shared to
in the red square up
to make one or two final comments. There we go. Okay. My excuse is in Spanish, so thank you. And there we are. It's a very exciting stage. Thank you for listening very intently, I hope, at what our hopes and ambitions are of this project. And we hope to deliver as much of this as we possibly can with the support of our friends around the country and more broadly. We'll be going to different conferences and seminars to spell out our ideas and to share our views, and to listen as much as we can over the next couple of years. Thanks again, and if there are any questions, I'll be very, very happy to take this opportunity to respond to them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for this suggesting talk. And as Gary said, if there is any question, or if Heather wants to say something, to add something, so please, we have time.
Yes, Heather, yes.
But put the micro, okay.
Just quite a lot, I'm sure.
No, I've nothing much to add, other than yeah, just to say thank you for I was going to say for having Gary and us sort of by extension, and yeah, no, just really, I was going to say really interested to hear about the project, but it's my project, so so I think I hopefully I knew all of that already. But yeah, if there are any specific questions about the oral history side of things, which is the part that I'm leading on, equally I can speak to that if anyone has any questions.
Thank you. And Yamin is leading on the.
Yes, there is on the chat. There is a question by Laura Carter.
Oh, hello, Laura. Nice to see you.
Yes, if you touch in the chat, she was interested about the data. Okay.
Hello.
If you want to do to pose the question, better.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Laura.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation, Gary, and hi, Heather. Really excited to hear about this. So yeah, it was a really basic question, and perhaps that's what you were referring to with oral history there, Heather. I just would love to know if it's going to be based on one particular region or one archive or one community? Yeah, so very, very boring technical question, but just really interesting.
Do you want me to?
More detail about that. Heather, I'm sure, can say some more, and also your Binder, who's also part of the project. But we've got 4 partner schools, and in different parts of Scotland, and so those would be at the heart of that. But Heather, do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, sure. So we're working with schools in Bradford, Glasgow, Cardiff, and London, and most of the oral history side of things will be intergenerational paired interviews between either people who experience school meals at some point in the post-war period and children who are receiving school meals today. They will be within families and communities around those particular schools. But we're also having a wider call for people involved in serving and preparing school meals, teachers and parents, going back to the 1940s, maybe even earlier if we can, in the first instance in those 4 communities, and then expanding to a national call to fill in gaps that may present themselves. And we've got myself and a full-time research associate who are going to be doing that side of things. But Gurpinder, who, as Gary said, is leading on the ethnographic strand, he's working with those schools more directly to gain contemporary ethnographic data around similar questions.
Thanks so much, Laura, for raising that. And any other questions?
Can I just, add one thing?
Sure.
Oh, sorry, maybe just, this is really, I could just add in the chat, but I'm going to be on research leave in the UK next semester. So if you guys want to meet up or talk about shared things, we might have stuff we can share from our project. I'll be in Oxford for the first term.
That's great. Perfect. To give a talk, we love it. We'll make contact with you.
Maria?
Oh yes, well, thank you. It's absolutely fascinating and obviously brings back lots of memories from the past. My question is actually, I don't know if your project's going to look at this, but for me, it's the most interesting thing about free school meals, is are you going to look at how it became such an important, in fact, the key indicator for school funding? And I'm particularly interested in whether there's any way of, doing comparisons with other countries, because I'm going back to my days as a head teacher in the 1990s, when it was discussed as to whether it could be replaced. And at that point, it was very much the consensus was that it was the indicator of poverty and educational disadvantage. And therefore, it was used for initially for the school funding formula when funds were delegated under local management, and subsequently used by Ofsted in terms of analysing performance data in terms of groups of school by the percentage of school meals that they have. And I just wonder if you're going to look at any of those issues.
Well, I think at least to some extent, it's very interesting the way in which those data are used. And in a way, that's become quite a science. The ability to make use of that data for understanding patterns of performance and who's likely to go on to university and those sorts of things. But there's significance in terms of the school meals themselves, the experience of school meals. I think we need to come back to that,
But it's
to really understand sort of the contemporary issues around what you would probably intuit from that massive data for understanding school meals themselves. That'll be the centre of it, but the wider policy implications, I think, are relevant to understanding that as well.
Thank you.
But also local secondary schools. I think as a retired teacher, you I think are particularly aware of the difficulties that schools may have had in acting themselves and getting proper provisions from different providers and the outcomes of that. And I think we'll be quite interested in that as we go along.
Yes, I think the whole question of head teachers like myself managing contracts and handling, contract bids and so on is probably a big issue for discussion, because it did in the long, in the short term, it impacted on what the children actually had on their plates in the dining room.
Absolutely, and I think these things are I think things which people are aware of, but maybe taken for granted. Just as much as, for example, in the post-war generation, it seemed to be part of the course that you should empty your plate. Have everything that was on your plate as part of the national effort, and that's something that has been important for a whole generation of former pupils, I think. And part of the experience of schooling that the well-known phenomenon of the pig bin, for example, the unwillingness to leave any waste. Those are part and parcel of the social experience of school meals, which I don't think we'll want to escape our attention.
Thank you.
Oh, we've got a few more here. Laura, okay. The label left, okay, yeah. I fell into the playground vernacular as a kind of insult or bullying term. Okay, that's fascinating. Thank you, Laura. Yeah, but I think that it was a kind of insult what we call damage. Of that kind of school child kind. Okay. Yeah, indeed. Well, I had free school meals myself at the time. I was part of a large family, and I fell into that same kind of policy that parent in London was doing. That actually wasn't my parent. It was, but I was at the school at the same time. No, it could be tough. Okay.
Any
Well,
question
thank-
from the table? Luis wants to ask you.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if in your preliminary findings, if there is any difference between urban, suburban, and rural areas regarding the
Well, it's too soon to say. We don't have preliminary findings of that kind. What we're doing. Did everybody get that? Do we have preliminary findings on differences between suburban, urban, and other kinds of areas? We'll certainly be hoping to get those over the next 6 to 9 months, and we'll be able to share much more into that kind of fieldwork data as we go along. We're really just starting, literally just starting on thinking about that fieldwork now. But thank you. That'll be an important question.
Okay. Simonetta, please.
I have a question, if you will. Thank you very much. That was very much interesting. I have a question. Thinking about Italy as well, the school meals, more medical question to start with, a very short thing to deal with people, poor children, and so on, giving them a balanced diet. And then gradually, they became, as you said, more educational things, staying together and being with their children and so on. I was wondering, and now, now it's not nearly nowadays, but a few years ago, we started having a big debate about which kind of food children should eat in a multicultural society. And so in canteens, in school meals nowadays is not just Italian food, but you get, say, one ethnic, so-called ethnic food from sort of Chinese or African. So. And there is a big debate because obviously half of this food goes into the bin because nobody eats really. Children will be happy with spaghetti. Yes, but also not Italian children because obviously that ethnic is not cooked properly. So anyway, there is then a big debate about then vegetarian, not vegetarian, and people say if Muslims children are allowed to not to have pork the day that there is pork, then why should my children eat pork and so on? And so I was thinking, since England experienced a multicultural society before, I mean, with people from India, from Muslim people, from did you have such a debate, say, in the 70s, the 80s, and what happened?
I think we can say already that there was such a debate even before that time. Even in the 1930s and 1940s, there was a sense about nutrition, about calories, about how many calories should make up your average school meal, about strategies that might be brought in to help to encourage children to eat their greens, have particular kinds of vegetables, what to mix, what to mix in to make them more palatable. During the war, how to get food in from the United States. They started to import various kinds of pate to mix with the local product. Again, encouraging school gardens in rural areas, going along with the teaching of cookery, really making that to be very much part and parcel of the school curriculum. You know, this is a kind of curriculum history, which we know too little about. But by the 1960s, really, when the UK was becoming a more multicultural society, this came to be an increasing issue for how to provide school meals for people from different cultures and religions, and the kind of letters from parents to local authorities and central government, it became, you know, quite common from that stage, and something which schools where they've taken up this mantle have needed to consider at the sense indeed, and what strategies should be brought into place in order to try to address that. So definitely that is a key issue in the UK, but I would have thought for other countries as well.
Okay, there is another comment by Kofi McKenna.
Yeah. Hello, Kathy.
You can read it.
Yes, Kathy asks, will there be any consideration given to the spaces provided at different times for students to have meals, as often there were multi-use spaces developed over time? Well, yes, I think so. I think that will be picked up, I think, in the ethnographies, in the school practices, the same as one would have a sense of, well, to what extent is there a proper lunchtime, as we used to have it in the past? What are the implications there for teachers as well as for the students? What kinds of tables, what kinds of utensils should there be? Is there a separate part of the school? What does this mean in terms of the school architecture? All of those sorts of things, I think we're needing to get to grips with if we want to understand the school as a social practice.
Okay, Heather, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, no, sorry, I just going to add to that. I mean, one thing Gurpinder is keen to do in his strand is to actually create a map of the what he calls the feeding architecture, which sounds sounds a little bit cruel, of the 4 partner schools that we're working with and all the different spaces that can be used for meals. And one of the things that struck me, we went to our Bradford partner school recently, and they have 6 or 7 different spaces that can be used for school meals at different times. They weren't using the hall the day we went because they were rehearsing Macbeth for a lunchtime performance, and that was a very good example of the adaptability that has to be present, and how that's been historically. It is quite interesting what the differences are over time. Hopefully we'll find that out.
Okay,
Yeah.
Gary, could you read the one of Panagiotis?
Yes,
for the recording.
Okay. Particularly interesting subject for the history of education. That's great. Speaking of comparisons, in continuation of the morning's discussion, in Greece, apart from immediate war zone experiences, no pupil feeding programs have been implemented. That's very interesting. You know, I was recently in Malta, and they've got their own kind of national experiences of that. So, last year I was in Milan for a conference, and Italy has got its own experiences. But there's also a sense of what kind of international cooperation there was in providing for school meals. And so far as I can see, the kind of history of that is yet to be developed. There's a lot of different angles from this, the very rich kind of aspects, which just waiting to be done.
And if you can read the point of Laura Carter.
Laura, yeah. Since you're talking to kids in schools today, it's for oral history, it's also interesting to think about how school meals might be now becoming a proxy for environmental concerns. For example, less meat, in historical comparison to how they were once a powerful proxy for multicultural education. Sure, and that I think is also a very powerful example of how the context changes. The broader context of issues and debates which will impinge on this issue change from one decade to the next, even 1 year to the next. So in thinking about the future, one needs to have very sort of close eye on how that context has changed. You know, I've said very airily perhaps today about the idea of a usable past, and Reverend Williams is a very good quote. But in doing that, you have to be very careful as a historian, as an educator, as a commentator, in understanding that the context are not doing violence to that, and to understanding that context. So while it's important, it's not always an easy thing to do, and that's why it's, you know, often not historians tend to keep to the history, and that is divorced from our understanding of the present. Understandable, but I think and we need to be making efforts to try and do more.
Okay, so I think if there is no, yes, there is a question.
Yes.
Carlos, you don't have time.
It's great how an apparently secondary issue could become a center for such a big array of issues and problems, and some of them really important. And my ignorance lead me to tell you, what do you expect? So the question of manners, how are you going to deal with this? Second is linked with this sensory history. I was amazed.
Okay.
In part because of my own experience. I was in a boarding school for children or families with problems and so on. And the sensory aspect of the food was so awful. we had a thing that we call surprise steak. Which is a funny thing that we never know, we never discover what was inside.
Surprise.
So my question are those manners, how are you going to and the sensory question?
Well, again, that's a kind of everyday experience, which we will be trying to get at, you know, as sympathetically as we can. I think that many former pupils have never forgotten. I among many will remember the lumpy custards which we used to have. And, I can never eat custard myself, even to this day. Many years later, and there'll be many people who have that kind of experience, among the many good ones, which I'm sure they'll have, of school meals. That's part of that sort of sensory experience of school meals from the point of view of the pupils, I think. But independent boarding schools are very interesting case. I don't think we'll be looking so much at independent schools, but you can see from many of the websites of independent schools that they make a big thing of the high quality of meals that the pupils at the schools will be able to take advantage of, and see that as part of the value of going to those schools. And again, that's a very interesting aspect.
Thank you. Really exciting project. I think that from our perspective in Argentina, which we have school meals for a very long period, this would fall into the category of, from a broader topic perspective, a category of citizenship building. And I was wondering issues about, well, Simonetta raised the issue of nationality, but all of this that we're here would fall into that category. And also I was wondering, you mentioned implication for teachers, and this has been it is nowadays a very relevant discussion in our country, because it is said that, and it's connected with spaces, because teachers have to sometimes provide meals in classrooms because there are no dining rooms. So these reduce the teaching hours, and it transforms the teachers' roles because they become feeders.
That's right. That's right.
So I was
and that is an issue. How much should teachers be expected to be supervising school meals just as much as they would be supervising fights in playgrounds? That has become an important part of the teacher's day.
Exactly.
That is an issue. And forms part of the changing relationship between teachers and food. I think a generation ago, home economy, domestic economy, food would be an important part of the school curriculum, but it's faded away to a large extent. Well, even a generation ago, many schools didn't teach food. I was never taught how to cook or whatever in my boys' grammar school. So that is varied as well. But in what ways is it part of the curriculum, and what expectations does that raise? What kind of training should that involve on the part of the teachers themselves?
Okay, perfect.
Lovely. Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for those excellent questions. And for the interest which you've shown.
No, thank you for coming, and thank you for you, and congratulations, as I think, as historians, because you have been able to connect history with nowadays questions, and to in your project to show that history can be useful and can add to solve the problems, everyday problems in our time. I love the quotes you did about Robin Williams, and Raymond Williams. And I think that we can finish here to say thank you to Gary, and thank you for all the people to be here. We meet again in Madrid.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.